If you're an author or plan to be one, get excited because this podcast is for you. Book Marketing Mentors is the only podcast dedicated to helping you successfully market and sell your book. If you're ready for empowering conversations with successful marketing mavens, then grab a coffee or tea and listen in to your host, international best-selling author Susan Friedmann.
Welcome to Book Marketing Mentors, the weekly podcast where you learn proven strategies, tools, ideas, and tips from the masters. Every week, I introduce you to a marketing master who will share their expertise to help you market and sell more books. Today, my special guest is Tony Robino. Tony is a leading collaborator and concept developer and literary talent scout for nonfiction books and novels. Her credits include New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and USA Today bestsellers. Tony is inspired to work on books that have the power to create positive change. She and her partner, Doug Wagner, also offer a customized writing course that walks first-time authors through the process of creating marketable books from concept through publication. She is an absolutely dear friend and colleague. Tony, what an absolute pleasure it is to welcome you to the show. And thank you for being this week's guest expert and mentor.
Aw, that's so sweet. And thank you for inviting me. I'm glad I finally made it. This is super fun.
I know it's been several years that I've been hounding you. Let's get you on the show. Let's get you on the show.
I was podcast shy. I've just gotten used to podcasts. But no, I'm good. This is going to be fun.
It's going to be really fun. Your specialty area is working with clients who are taken on by traditional publishers. And I often get authors who come to me and say, I want to be traditionally published. If that's the case, what are the steps that they would need to take to even be considered by a traditional publisher?
Well, that's a great question. They're going to be considered by literary agents before they'll ever talk to anyone in a publishing house. What they need to do is they need to write a query letter and they need to write a nonfiction book proposal for a nonfiction book. Those are very specific pieces that cover very specific items of information. The writer will use the query letter to pitch literary agents. And what's tricky is that every literary agent has different requirements. Some of them want a one-page query letter and a 30-page proposal. Some of them want to see the first chapter. Some of them want to see excerpts from throughout the book. They all have very specific rules about how they want to be pitched, so you can't just create a customized package. And it's a very time-consuming process. The other thing to keep in mind is that prior to the pandemic, there were about 3,000, very active agents in the United States, and that number has dropped. Agents typically make 15% of an author's advance. And if a nonfiction book is only making $10,000 or $20,000 in an advance, you can see how little the agent is making for all the time they put in. So they are looking for pitch packages that they know they can sell tomorrow. I mean, they're not looking for something that's going to take 100 conversations to sell. They need to know it's a marketable idea. It fills an empty hole on the bookshelf. The author already has an outreach and a following that's significant, and that means engagement, not just 10,000 people on Instagram. So all of those things need to be in place to really even get an agent to take a look at what you have.
Wow, that's already a lot. Let's sort of replay a little bit and talk about where would you even try and find agents to consider representing you?
Well, one great place is Jeff Herman's Guide to Book Publishers, Editors, and Literary Agents. And I know that he has a new edition coming out next year because I just updated my chapter for him that's in the back of the book. That's a great place. Another really great place is writers' conferences. A lot of them happen to be virtual right now, but there's nothing like being face-to-face from an agent to, have them remember you. And a lot of times, an agent may not be interested in the first book that you pitch, but if they like you and they think you're mediagenic, you seem like you'd be an interesting, good person to work with, they might say, well, what else do you have? Let me look at your resume. What other areas of expertise might be more marketable than this particular project that you're pitching me today?
And then you talked about a query letter. Talk to us more about what exactly that is. And I know that you said that there isn't a sort of one size fits all, but in general, what is a query letter? What does it contain?
In general, for nonfiction, most literary agents are going to ask for a one-page letter. It can be single-spaced. The very first paragraph, you're going to tell them what's the concept of the book. And it has to be very clear in that first paragraph that you're offering something that nobody's done before. Then you move into who is the audience and why do they need this book? That would be your second paragraph. And these might be one or two paragraphs each. Third, why are you an authority? What credentials do you have that make you an expert in this field? Very, very important. And then the fourth thing you want to address is what differentiates this book from all the other books on the topic. You're doing a setup, a hook, and a resolution, essentially. But here's an example. Mrs. Book has already been published. Hot Flashes, Warm Bottles, a guide for the first-time moms over 40 is the first prescriptive guidebook for multitudes of women who make up the growing ranks of midlife mothers. So that answers what is the book and who is the audience. Next, the concerns of these women are unique. They are as different from the concerns of young mothers as they are from older mothers with grown children. This answers why does the audience need this book? Then she says, Hot Flashes combines the candid and often hilarious anecdotes from the women in Nancy's support groups with field-tested and mother-approved advice. That answers is the author and authority in the field. Hot Flashes promises to be the Bible for this growing demographic of women whose concerns are not yet addressed elsewhere and who are actively seeking resources. And that answers, are there other competitive titles, essentially? So that's the main format. And the one mistake that people tend to make is they waste that first paragraph that I refer to as prime real estate by saying, Dear Susan Friedmann, I know that you're a literary agent who represents these types of topics, and that's why I'm writing to you. You don't need to do that. They know they're a literary agent. They know what they represent. And they know that if they're getting a letter from you, you're probably not inviting them to your birthday party. So just get right to the point. The faster, the better.
That's so good. And thank you for that example, because that was beautiful. And then going through the different steps that you need. And I know listeners, you're going to have to listen to this again and again so that you can take it down.
Right.
But we have a transcript, so you'll be able to see it in the transcript as well. Let's say that a literary agent takes you on. They find you a publisher. Yay.
Yay.
What can you expect from a traditional publisher?
Well, Susan, this is one of those questions nobody likes the answers to. Most of my wealthy clients who can afford to produce their own books, even if they have very original ideas that a traditional publisher would pick up, and they have an extensive outreach and following, are choosing not to go the route of traditional publishing these days because they can do better marketing if they hire their own people, better PR. They can sell more books, actually, in a lot of cases, and they're going to make more money per book. The people in my network that are still trying to get traditional contracts are the ones who can't afford to produce their own books. But publishers are giving very low advances nowadays for books in most cases, unless you happen to be a celebrity, a famous politician, a new cure for cancer. A lot of publishers aren't giving any advance. I mean, the advantage to that is that you might actually earn some royalties on your book if you don't get an advance, because it'll mean that they don't have to recoup their expenses, and the advance that they already gave you. But ultimately, what you're going to get is you're going to get the published book, and you're probably going to get a few press releases that they're going to put out. One of the best things that you get is the distribution part of it. You don't have to handle any of that yourself. You might have some opportunities for media, but, there are no book tours anymore. I shouldn't say no, there's probably an exception to everything I'm saying, but in general, there are not those kinds of things anymore. And both agents and publishers are looking for authors to already have a network to sell that book to. I'll give you an example. The book called Atomic Habits that was, an instant New York Times bestseller, it wasn't because the book is well written, which it is. It's because the author already had millions of people active in his network before that book was published. They were all waiting for that book. When the book was released on the very first day, they got a gazillion sales. It shot right up to the top of the New York Times bestseller list. And then, of course, other people started to pay attention and word of mouth marketing, and the ball keeps rolling. But all of the credit for that New York Times bestseller goes to the author and his team. The publisher had very little, if anything, to do with that book becoming a bestseller.
Going on to the coattails of that, isn't the marketing side of a proposal so important in terms of how you're going to get the book out there? I mean, isn't that what the traditional publisher wants to know?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll tell you, as somebody who used to be a reader for Jeff Herman Literary Agency, and because I have a large network of agents, different agents will look at a proposal sections in different ways, but usually they read the overview, which is 3 to 5 pages, which is like your commercial for who needs this book and why. Are they going to buy it immediately? It's less about what the book's about and why the book is needed. And then they're going to skip right to your author's bio to see if you have the credibility to do a book with this topic. And if that checks out, the next step is usually to look at the table of contents to see, okay, does this person know how to really put a book together? Is this all in logical order for readers? Is the kind of content that we know readers will want in a book like this? And then the next thing they'll go and look at is your marketing and your outreach section. And that is, how big is your outreach right now? How active are you in this thing that you're teaching about? Do you have a bunch of people who get your newsletter every month? All of those things. And they also look at the comp section, which is competition, like competitive and comparable books, because they want to know that there is not another book like this on the market. So many people come to me and they say, I have this book. And I say, well, have you Google searched your keywords? And sometimes they haven't. And then they're very depressed when they do, because they see that there's 20 other books that have already written by this, and they don't really have something new to say to add to the conversation. So you really have to be either taking the current conversation to the next level, or you need to be disrupting what the current belief is about a particular thing. But it all has to come across as new and necessary.
Fascinating information. You said something earlier, and I'm going to jump on that, and that is getting onto the New York Times bestseller list. I know you said with Atomic Habits that, James Clear got that instantly because, he had the network to do that. But how does the regular Joe get it on there?
It really is kind of a mystery how they add up those numbers and which bookstores they count and which bookstores they don't count, and if they're counting online sales or not, and ebooks. I mean, I don't know why this is it's like it's in a vault somewhere, how they calculate these things, and nobody seems to tell us. But I will tell you that if an author or an agent promises you a bestseller, run, because nobody can promise you a bestseller. It just doesn't happen that way. I mean, it really has so much to do with the author's outreach and marketing in nonfiction in particular. We have a client that we worked with in an editorial capacity whose name is Brad Aronson, and he wrote a book called Humankind, Changing the World One Small Act at a Time. And he published with a hybrid, but he was able to get great endorsements from people like Deepak Chopra and a lot of other best-selling authors. And he was able to get a lot of media because 100% of the proceeds of his book are going to Big Brothers and Big Sisters in Philadelphia, which he volunteers for. He was able to use that angle of, the book essentially being a fundraiser to get a lot of media that most nonfiction authors are not going to get.
And so he made it to the bestseller list. Is that what you're saying?
I'm glad you finished that loop for me. Thank you. Yeah. You know how my mind runs around. He made it on USA Today and Wall Street Journal. He did not yet make it onto the New York Times bestseller list, but he sold more than 50,000 books in the last couple of years, which is a lot of books, and a lot more books than many of the traditional titles that came out at the same time have sold.
Going to that, Wall Street Journal and USA Today, which are sort of second and third in line, how do you even get on them? I mean, is it just selling this number of books? And how do they find out that you've sold these kind of numbers?
Yeah, all of the different publications and other places that have bestseller lists have ways to track numbers, and they have different methods. But essentially, it does come down to selling a whole lot of books. And a lot of times it comes down to selling a whole lot of books on one day. One way that an author can increase their chances of making it onto any of the lists is to have a whole lot of pre-sold books. So in other words, you start marketing and selling your book 6 months out or 3 months, before it's even released, and you already have a giant network. If you get 50,000, 100,000 books in pre-sales, you'll probably make the New York Times list that day. You may not stay on the list, depending on what other books are coming out or if the book continues to sell. But that is one of the methods that some people are using. And it's not easy to do because I've heard that they don't necessarily count bulk orders. Like if you got a company to order 10,000 books, one for all of their employees, there's no guarantee that that would count toward your sales for the various best-selling things that are categories that are out there. And then the other thing I want to say is, and this is just a note of caution, if you're self-publishing or you're a hybrid author, please don't put best-selling on the front of your book unless it really has sold a ton of copies, because all people have to do is look it up on Amazon and they see you have 10 reader reviews and they're like, this person's lying, and the last thing you want to do is hurt your credibility right off the bat. And anybody can say something's a bestseller. It could be a bestseller on my street, in my neighborhood. The only time those words really mean anything is when they are attached to New York Times, Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and those kinds of things.
Saying that, I mean, so many people are doing the Amazon bestseller. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's fine to say that you're an Amazon bestseller because that's true, if it's true. Those numbers change constantly. We used to think that there was some validity and, including sales ranks in a book proposal, but they change from day to day based on the author's media, when other book sales spike, all kinds of things. So neither agents or traditional publishing houses, the acquisitions editors, are that interested in Amazon ranks. The other thing that they're not interested in is a book that's already been published. If you have self-published a book, no agent that I know of is going to want to take that book. If the book only sold a few copies, but it's brilliant, they might suggest that you cancel the ISBN, get a new one, change the title, and go about the whole thing differently. This time maybe trying to do it through traditional publishing. But I get asked that all the time at conferences. People bring me books that have been published, and I know that none of the agents in my audience, in my network, are going to respond to that.
And it's interesting that you say that because a few of my authors have actually published first through Aviva Publishing, as you know, is a hybrid publisher, and having sold, I don't know how many thousands of copies, have been traditionally published. But like you said, they're given a new ISBN number and sometimes the title has changed or the book cover. So it's taking on a whole new lease of life. But they have been interested. So I do say to people, if they sell 10,000, 50,000, they're going to get some eyeballs looking at them.
You're absolutely right about that. And I'm glad you mentioned that exception. And that actually has happened with Brad, where he had publishers who were not interested prior to his great success with selling the book, who are now interested. But because he's using the book as a fundraiser, he's not interested. He's going to stick with his hybrid and keep channeling all the money to the charities.
Yeah, because, I know having got 4 books traditionally published, the royalties are peanuts.
Yeah,
it's nice to get a check, but I'm not going to survive very long on what I get. So,
no, it's true. And a lot of it has to do with how long the book stays in print. A book that I co-authored many, many, many years ago was actually called potty train your child in just one day. Not exactly like a barn burner kind of book, but it sold really well and it sold for 20 years. And I made more royalties on that book than I've made so far on the bestsellers just because of longevity. And she was really good at selling books too. She had partnership with Babies R Us and other stores and, went around at her own expense to promote this book and did really, really well.
It's interesting because, as I told you prior to starting to record this, that I'm talking to Wiley about my meeting and event planning for dummies that they want to revise. They've asked me if I'd like to do it. And this book is 20 years old, but sales have been consistent over that time. And so they've come back and said, hey, we need to update it because it's got nothing about virtual meetings or hybrid meetings, podcasting or social media. I mean, that didn't exist 20 years ago. Sounds as if I came out of Noah's Ark.
I know. I'm like, what dinosaur age was I born in? No, but that's the best thing. And that's a huge stamp of approval on you as an author that, not only do they want to revive the book with the updated modern day spin, but that you have so much credibility with what you do that they didn't just go off and find somebody else to do a new book. They came back to you. And that's what every author wants, whether you're with a hybrid publisher or a traditional publisher. You want them to know how good you are and that you're a valuable part of their house.
Yeah. And it's interesting because you were instrumental in helping me with my Riches and Niches book, which was also an international bestseller. And they were interested in updating the book. And that's maybe 13 years old. One of the things that I found is that for books to have longevity, they have to be what's known as evergreen so that they will last the time. It isn't trendy that next year or the year after it's dead.
Yeah, that's for sure. And, it's those timeless messages, sometimes universal principles, if you want to call it that do stand the test of time. And a lot of parables too. You look at some of the books by Jonathan Livingston Seagull not by the Seagull, by Richard Bach, who wrote Jonathan Livingston Seagull. Illusions by Richard Bach is the one that I was actually thinking of that came after Jonathan Livingston Seagull. But that book came out in the 70s, and that book is still selling. The Alchemist is another one that's, selling for a very long time. People don't always think in terms of presenting their nonfiction messages, in a kind of a parable or in a novel kind of way. But a lot of those books sell for a very long time.
Yeah. This is the point in the show that I say, tell us or tell the listeners rather, because I know where to find you, but our listeners will want to know how to find you. So share what information you can about how they can contact you and the kinds of people you'd interested in hearing from too.
Okay. Well, you can Google me. If you type in my name, Toni, Toni, Robino, Robino, and writer, I'll come up in a million different ways. My website will come up. My website is Windword, WINDWORD, literaryservices.com. You can find me there. I'm also on Instagram, and I'm on Twitter, and I'm on Facebook, and I'm on LinkedIn. And there's only 3 Tony Robinos spelled my way, as far as I know, on the planet, and none of the other ones are writers. So I'm easy to find. If you want help writing your book, we do have our fabulous one-on-one coaching teaching program called Book Walk, Journey from Dream to Publication. Be happy to talk to you about that. I do not work in the capacity of a literary talent scout, except with my own clients, personal referrals, and people that I meet at conferences. I can't say that you can send me a pitch package. I probably won't be able to have time to read it if you do. But you can read many of my blog posts, and there's webinars, and there's all kinds of stuff that address all these things all over the place. So any of that for sure. And who am I looking for? My ideal clients are people in nonfiction and fiction who, have a vision to make the world a better place in some very particular ways. I love to support that work.
Beautiful. And I know you do, and you do a fantastic job at it as well. If you were to leave our listeners with a golden nugget, Toni, what would that be?
I say this a lot, and I think it's worth saying a lot. Don't cheat yourself. Whatever your goals are, I believe they're achievable as long as you're willing to do the work, put in the time, you have the discipline, you get the team, whatever you need. Don't cheat yourself. Don't wake up when you're 90 and say, oh, darn, if only I had done this or that. I might have actually had the kind of book success that I was looking for. Do the work and just prevail and get experts to help you like Susan, and you will succeed.
That's nice. Yes. And Toni.
Thank you.
And Doug as well. I know Doug's working on a novel for one of my clients. So that's wonderful. Toni, this has been amazing. I'm still pinching myself that I managed to finally get you on the show. Thank you so much for sharing your incredible wisdom. And thank you all for taking time out of your precious day to listen to this interview. And I sincerely hope that it sparked some ideas you can use to sell more books. Here's wishing you much book and author marketing success.
The time is now to take action and finally build your book-selling empire. And the great news is that Susan is here to help you. Visit bookmarketingmentors.com and sign up for a free 15-minute book marketing strategy session with Susan. She'll help you discover your first steps to marketing and selling your book. Only those who take action are rewarded, so visit bookmarketingmentors.com, and we'll see you again next week.